Forget, when you hit rock bottom, things can only get better. Rock bottom, despite being sad, is also a turning point, a new page in our lives, ready to be written. The rule is simple: fall, suffer, and rise. Only by rising will we see that the story continues and that it can be beautiful. Since childhood, Susan had cherished the dream of building an idealized family, envisioning herself in a bridal gown with a veil and tiara, in a vibrant home filled with the contagious laughter of her children echoing through the walls. After facing a series of romantic disappointments that shook her heart and heightened her anxiety about finding true love, she finally met Robert. He appeared as a beacon in her life, precisely when she had decided to no longer actively seek a partner. The connection was immediate and profound, and in less than 3 years, they formalized their union in a marriage that began the home Susan so dearly desired. The marriage was quickly blessed with the arrival of David, a joyful boy who became the center of the couple's universe. Both Susan and Robert, shaped by a childhood of deprivation and challenges, were determined to provide their son with a more secure and prosperous existence. They were meticulous with finances, committed to saving every penny they could to ensure a promising future for David. Despite modest income and the difficulties in stretching their budget to the end of the month, they always managed to save something for David's well-being. Due to financial constraints, the couple decided not to expand their family, fearing they could not adequately support a second child. Nonetheless, Susan and Robert were often seen as a model to follow, a united family despite obstacles. Once, seeking a change in routine, Robert suggested a weekend beach trip with Susan and David. Excited, he planned, "We can leave Friday night after work and return at the end of Sunday," envisioning the opportunity to do something different and to introduce the sea to little David, who at 4 years old, had yet to experience the vast blue. However, Susan hesitated at the proposal. Aware of the costs associated with such an escapade, she pondered, spending the weekend at the beach, just like that, without any special reason, is a very high cost. The concern about the budget was always present in her mind. Robert, not wanting to give up so easily, highlighted the benefits of breaking the daily monotony and how enriching it would be for David to experience the sea. However, Susan, always practical and cautious, suggested delaying the plan. "Let's wait for things to get a bit better, okay? For now, it's better if we focus on organizing our finances well, okay?" Robert, although disappointed, reluctantly agreed, accepting the decision with a resigned sigh. "All right, let's leave it for another day then." The difference in financial priorities between him and Susan was clear and often put the couple at odds. Indeed, Susan was much more concerned about money than Robert. The initiative to create a savings fund for David had come from her, and she managed it with extreme rigor. She fervently wished the best for her son and, reflecting on her behavior, recognized that her aversion to financial risk had led her to give up many leisure opportunities and enriching experiences. For years, whenever Robert proposed any novelty involving expenses, Susan promptly refused. The rare exceptions were outings for lunches or dinners on special occasions. This financial rigor was a source of frequent tensions, leading to fervent discussions, although Robert generally ended up conceding to Susan's decisions. The persistent feeling that they were constantly saving, yet never having enough, hung like a cloud over the couple, coloring their daily interactions with a nuance of constant dissatisfaction. Over the years, a notable change began to manifest in Robert's behavior. The man who was once full of affection and warmth had become distant and reserved. Susan, with her sharp sensitivity, quickly realized that something was not right. She tried to talk to him, seeking to understand what was happening, but Robert remained evasive, dodging her questions with vague answers and changing the subject. One day, as she walked quietly through the house, Susan found Robert in a hidden corner, crying alone. The shock of seeing tears on the face of someone who had always been the pillar of strength for the family deeply alarmed her. Concerned, she approached him gently, touching his shoulder. Robert, what happened? Why are you crying like this?" Taking a deep breath, Robert looked at her with tear-blurred eyes and said, "Susan, I didn't want to tell you, but I can't hide this from you either. Jacob is in trouble. He's practically bankrupt, on the verge of losing his house, and owes money to a loan shark. Now he can't pay, and the guy is threatening him, his son, and his wife." His voice was choked with anguish, his words coming out haltingly. Oh my God, how did Jacob get himself into this? Susan exclaimed, shocked by the revelation. Robert wiped his tears and continued, desperation, Susan. Desperation does this to people. He's my best friend and I want to help. You need to see how terrified he is. Just think, his son is the same age as David. Imagine if something happens to him. I need to help somehow. Susan felt a mix of compassion and concern. But how can we help, Robert? What can we do? She asked, her voice trembling with the helplessness of the situation. With hesitation, Robert suggested, Susan, he's the one who helped us the most when we needed it. I need to repay him now. I know you won't like this, but I thought about using part of David's savings to lend to him. The suggestion to use a significant amount of David's savings to help Jacob made Susan's heart sink. She knew how hard they had worked to accumulate that money, intended for their son's future. Robert, that's a lot of money. It's our son's security at stake, she responded, her voice laden with hesitation. Despite her initial reluctance, seeing the desperation in Robert and remembering how crucial Jacob had been during their wedding preparations, Susan finally gave in. All right, but please, let's try to find a way for Jacob to pay us back, she agreed, although with great apprehension. After the money was withdrawn from the savings, Robert ceased to mention anything about Jacob or the debt. Whenever Susan brought up the subject, he responded in a dry and evasive manner, which only fueled her suspicions that there was more to the story than what was being told. An uncomfortable intuition began to grow within her, suggesting that Robert might be hiding something even more serious. Despite her doubts, Susan found it increasingly difficult to confront Robert directly as he began to display an unusual amount of affection, more so than even before Jacob's financial crisis. This return to what seemed like normalcy was confusing for Susan. It made her question whether her suspicions were just a result of her own insecurities, stemming from the betrayal she had already endured. Robert, we need to talk about what happened with Jacob, Susan would start, trying to gauge his reaction. Robert would simply shrug, a practiced look of innocence on his face. Susan, why dwell on the past? We have our whole lives ahead of us, he would say, attempting to redirect their conversations to plans for the future or everyday concerns. As time passed, this newfound affection from Robert brought a superficial peace to their home, which Susan desperately wanted to believe in. She found herself trying to shove her doubts to the back of her mind, telling herself perhaps it was for the best. Maybe the money is gone and it's never coming back. Maybe I should just focus on what we have now, she would think to herself, trying to accept the semblance of stability that had returned to their relationship. One day, while Susan was at home taking care of David, the doorbell rang abruptly, breaking the usual calm. When she opened the door, she encountered a young woman whose striking beauty and evident youth made her appear to be in her early 20s. Susan had never seen her before, but it was clear that the woman knew exactly who she was. There was a recognition in her eyes, a weight that seemed to carry more than just the surprise of a casual encounter. For a moment, the young woman just stood there, looking at Susan, analyzing her, as if gathering the courage to speak. Then, the floodgates opened and tears began to flow. With a voice choked by crying, she said, I need to tell you something about Robert. Susan, feeling a tightness in her heart, instinctively opened the door wider, signaling for the young woman to come in. Please come in. Let's talk. Inside the living room, the woman took a deep breath and revealed, still sobbing, I have been involved with Robert for the past few months. She paused as if the next words were the hardest to say. I got pregnant by him, and he pressured me, he practically forced me to have an abortion. Those words hit Susan like a blow, causing her to falter for a moment. The world around seemed to spin, each word a hammer shattering the image of the man she loved. How did this start? Susan managed to ask, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. The woman, an intern at the company where Robert worked, told her that he had approached her with stories of a marriage that was ending. He said he was getting divorced and I believed him. We got involved and things went too far. She explained how their weekly meetings led to an unplanned pregnancy. Susan, although wanting to unleash her anger on the woman in front of her, felt a greater force holding her back. She listened, motionless, as the young woman apologized, revealing how Robert had turned her life into a hell, filled with threats and manipulations to end the pregnancy. The final shock came with the revelation that the money that was supposed to help Jacob, had never been used for that purpose. There was no financial crisis with Jacob, the young woman confessed. All the money you took from David's savings was used to pay for the abortion. At this revelation, Susan felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The betrayal was deep, cutting through all the trust she had in Robert. The fact that he had forced someone to do something they both considered abominable added an even darker layer to his betrayal. "I never wanted things to reach this point," the woman said, looking at Susan with eyes brimming with sincerity and pain. Susan, devastated, knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. The truth hurt, but it was impossible to ignore the young woman's eyes, filled with painful and raw truth. The life she thought she knew had been shattered, leaving her with the pieces of a puzzle she never wanted to assemble. Susan, amid a whirlwind of emotions, knew she needed confrontation and clarity. She firmly insisted that the young woman stay, waiting for Robert's arrival. When he finally entered the door, the sight of his mistress sitting calmly on the sofa caused him to stop abruptly, a visible shock of panic etched on his face. What's going on here? What is this crazy woman doing here? Did she hurt you, Susan? Where's David, huh? Did she do something to him?" His questions were frenetic, a mix of accusation and concern. Susan, with a calculated coolness that masked the storm within her, confronted him directly, her voice firm and unwavering. "You have 24 hours to deposit all the money from your son's abortion into my account. Hurry up, because you also only have 24 hours to take all your things from here and disappear from my life." Robert, still trying to grasp the situation, began to desperately defend himself. "She's lying, Susan. She's a crazy woman in love who's blackmailing me, don't believe her." His voice was a mix of pleading and indignation. But Susan was beyond the point of believing any word that came out of his mouth. With a cutting tone, she interrupted, "You are a scoundrel. You are not a man. You betrayed me, deceived me, and even took the life of a baby who was innocent of your wrongdoing." Seeing that his lies had no effect, Robert, cornered, finally admitted the truth, but tried to justify his actions in a last desperate effort. "Life was very hard, Susan. We could never do anything, it was just save money. I'm sorry, please, I know I made a mistake, but I love you. I only did this because I couldn't risk losing you. That's why." Susan, hearing Robert's words, felt a wave of disgust and betrayal. "I understand?" "I don't want to understand," she responded, her voice trembling with the pain accumulated from the revelations, unable to accept his flimsy excuses. Robert's confession did nothing more than solidify her decision to end that relationship corroded by lies and disloyalty. Robert left the house that same early morning, leaving behind a shattered family. Despite his promises, the money for the abortion was never returned to Susan's account. In the following years, she tirelessly fought to recover every penny, facing a draining legal and emotional battle. However, over time, the importance of that money faded for Susan. More than the financial aspect, what truly consumed her was the bitter memory of having dedicated years of her life to such an unworthy man, someone who had irreparably broken her trust and deeply affected her son's life. The pain of the betrayal and the wound of disappointment became permanent marks on her heart, but also a drive to rebuild her life on new foundations of strength and independence. After the painful revelation and subsequent separation, Robert proved to be even less present and responsible than Susan could have feared. In a disheartening manner, he began to distance himself from David, displaying an almost shocking lack of remorse. The boy, still too young to fully understand the complexities of adult relationships, often asked about his father. Susan, with a heavy heart, found herself struggling to provide answers that would spare her son from the harsh reality. It was a painful restart, Susan confided to a friend over coffee. "As some nights, after David goes to sleep, I wonder how I will manage to get back on my feet." But in her darkest moments, she remembered an old maxim her mother often repeated: "When you are at rock bottom, the only way is up." It was this belief that kept her fighting. In search of stability, Susan and David moved into her parents' house. Returning to her childhood home brought a sense of security and comfort that was much needed. With the emotional support of her parents, she slowly began to rebuild herself financially and emotionally. Mom, Dad, I don't know what I would do without you," she often expressed, grateful for her safe haven. After dedicating time to healing and self-improvement, Susan felt she was finally ready to open her heart to the possibility of love again. Her journey led her to a dating app where she met William. Initially, Susan was cautious about diving into a serious relationship. The wounds from her past were still tender, and the idea of trusting someone new felt daunting. Yet, there was something about William that piqued her interest and made her want to take that risk. Their first conversation was light and filled with laughter, a welcome change from the heaviness that had marked her interactions in the past. What brought you to this crazy world of online dating?" William had asked with a playful grin during their first video call. "I guess I'm just trying to find some magic in the mundane," Susan had responded, her smile cautious yet genuine. From then on, their talks grew longer and more personal. William shared his dreams and fears, and so did Susan. It was the kind of connection that unfolded naturally, with each conversation bringing them closer. William was not just kind to Susan, he also showed a genuine interest in David. The first time they met in person, William brought a small toy helicopter for David, remembering Susan mentioning her son's fascination with flying things. "Hey champ, I hear you're the best pilot in town," William had said, kneeling to be at eye level with David. The joy on David's face as he took the toy and immediately began sharing his extensive knowledge about helicopters warmed Susan's heart. How do you guys get along so well right from the start?" Susan marveled one afternoon as she watched William and David set up a model airplane. "It means the world to me. It's easy to love what you love," William replied, his gaze softening as he looked at her and then at David playing in the background. Over time, their relationship blossomed into a partnership based on mutual respect, love, and shared responsibilities. Together, they decided to build a home, a space that was truly theirs, free from the shadows of the past. Their new home became a symbol of their commitment to each other and to a shared future. "I've learned that I can't just live thinking about the future or worrying about money all the time. We need to enjoy the present," Susan reflected one evening as she watched David and William chase each other around the garden, their laughter echoing through the air. Today, Susan lives a life filled with comfort, love, and laughter in the home that she and William built together. It is a testament to her resilience and her ability to rebuild from the ground up, a life rich with possibilities and grounded in the joy of the present. As for Robert, the last news Susan heard about him came through mutual friends. He had remarried and had another daughter. Although the news might have brought a twinge of bitterness, Susan felt relieved and even grateful for her new life. "Despite everything, I think life has been generous to me," she said with a smile. "I fell, I got hurt, but I also got up much stronger and happier." Reflecting on her past, Susan understood that without that pain, she might not have found the true happiness that now colored her days. The torment, which once seemed unbearable, had turned into a deliverance, paving the way for a new life filled with possibilities and love.